So what did you learn about ionic bonds? Let's just summarize. What are ionic bonds?
Ma'am, there are the bond between a metal and a non-metal.
Bonds between a metal and a non-metal. Very good. What else?
Ma'am, an ion is formed when an atom or an element like loses or gains electrons.
Loses or gains electrons. Yes, very good. What else? What else is an ionic bond? How is ionic bond formed?
Means it can be formed with two metals, crisscross and the one, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is true. So basically, when an element loses or gains an atom to reach noble gas configuration, yes. When atoms give or take electrons to get noble gas configuration, yeah. So that is right. So what is ionic bond? It's nothing but a complete transfer of electron from one atom to another atom or between two atoms. Yes, Kavya. Naisha, very good. So ionic bond is the complete transfer of electron from one atom to another atom. Now, in our general English language, when I say the word, when I use the prefix co, for example, as coexist or coordinate, cooperate,
Covalent.
Yeah, what is the meaning of this? Yes. So co meaning sharing. So when I say coexist, it means that I'm sharing a space or a living space together with another organism. For example, humans and animals coexist. Meaning what? We share the same space with each other. Right? So that's what we mean when we say humans and animals coexist. Coexist meaning we are sharing the existence. So the word or the prefix co means sharing. Okay. So when I say covalent, that means I'm talking about sharing of valence electrons. Okay. So covalent is sharing of valence. All right, so now let's take for example carbon. Okay, so I'm going to take carbon. Carbon has atomic number 6. What is the electronic configuration?
2,4.
Ma'am, 2,4.
2,4, very good. 2,
Valence 4.
Yes.
Yeah,
So now, if I draw the Lewis dot structure of this, I can draw it as 4 dots. Right? Now,
yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so now for carbon to lose 4 electrons or gain 4 electrons, which one is easy?
Both are easy.
Both are equally easy or equally difficult, right?
Yeah.
So what carbon ends up doing is it starts sharing its electrons. It doesn't want to lose these electrons and neither does it want to take responsibility of any new electrons. So what it will do, it will share these electrons which it already has with another atom which wants these electrons. For example, it will bring in a hydrogen. Okay?
Ma'am, maybe the best example is oxygen.
Best example is oxygen. Why?
Ma'am, I think it's a good example, like oxygen.
Okay, fine. We can use oxygen as well for an example, but right now I'm going to take hydrogen, okay? All
Yes.
right. So I'm going to take hydrogen and hydrogen has atomic number 1, electronic configuration 1. So it has, its Lewis dot structure is nothing but 1 dot. Okay, so I'm just going to place a hydrogen next to the carbon and hydrogen requires 1 more electron in order to complete its duplet configuration. So it takes or it shares one of its electrons with carbon. Now after sharing, how many electrons does carbon have?
5.
5 electrons. What about this hydrogen?
2 electrons.
2 electrons. Very good. So hydrogen has completed its duplet rule, but carbon has not completed its octet rule. So what will happen? These three electrons will require 3 more hydrogens.
CH4.
Yes. So now each of these hydrogens have 2 electrons, 2 electrons, 2 electrons. Now how many electrons does this carbon end up having after sharing?
8.
8 electrons. Great. So this is kind of like a win-win situation, right? Carbon ends up following the octet configuration, and all of the hydrogens end up getting the duplet configuration, and everything is fine. Okay, so this process of not losing any electrons, not gaining any electrons, but simply sharing electrons is called covalent bonding. Okay, so if I represent this bond, this is a bond. Okay, so basically sharing of 2 electrons between sharing of a pair of electrons between 2 atoms forms a bond. So this bond I can represent with a line. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to say C with a line like this. So this line is nothing but basic, it's just 2 electrons, okay, that are being shared. So those 2 electrons I'm representing with a line. Okay, so this is CH4. So this is the structure of methane.
Ma'am?
Yes.
Sometimes there are two lines or like that. Why?
I will tell you that. So methane is, yeah, so CH4 is nothing but methane. Now what I'm going to do, instead of drawing the Lewis dot structure of carbon like how I did previously, I'm going to draw the Lewis dot structure somewhat like this. Okay, so CC, one up and one down. Sorry, C with 2 electrons on the right, one up and one down. So this is my first carbon. I'm going to take one more carbon now. This is my second carbon, and I'm going to draw its structure or Lewis dot structure like this. Okay. Then what I'll do is I'll share one of the electrons of this carbon with the electron of this carbon, and I'll share one more electron of this carbon with an electron of this carbon. And then these 2 electrons of the first carbon, I'll just put a hydrogen. Then what happens? This ends up forming a bond, this ends up forming a bond, this ends up forming a bond, and then this ends up forming a bond. Now the first carbon, if you count after sharing electrons, how many electrons is the first carbon having? After sharing?
6. No,
How 6?
8.
Yes, Ronak? 8. Very good. Okay, so the first carbon has 8 electrons, right? So it's getting 1 electron from this hydrogen, another electron from this hydrogen, and it is getting 2 more electrons from the second carbon. Okay, so this carbon atom ends up having 8 electrons. This hydrogen has 2 electrons. This hydrogen has 2 electrons. Similarly, the second carbon also ends up having 8 electrons. Hydrogen has 2 electrons, and this hydrogen has 2 electrons. So everything is satisfying the octet and the duplet rule. So I'm just going to write that as C double bond C, H, 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 H. And this is C2H2 called ene.
Ma'am,
Yes.
why did you give 2 lines in between C?
Because there are, how many electrons are being shared between the 2 carbon atoms?
2.
How many? Are there 2 or 4?
4.
4 electrons are being shared, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Each electron pair is represented by a line. So that is why there are two lines.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Did everybody understand this? Say yes if you understood, no if you did not. Yes, Ronak.
Ma'am, the atomic number of carbon is 6, then why did we take four electrons?
Atomic number of carbon is 6, so why did we take in the Lewis dot structure, you mean?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, anybody wants to answer that? The atomic number of carbon is 6. So why does the Lewis dot structure have only 4 electrons? All right. So the Lewis dot structure only has the valence electrons. So it only has the valence electrons. The number of valence electrons in carbon is 4. That is why in the Lewis dot structure, I'm only drawing 4 electrons. Is this clear, Ronak?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So Lewis dot structure has only the valence electrons. That's it. Okay, now let us take a look at another way of doing this. Now, instead of drawing the Lewis dot structure of carbon with 2 electrons on one side, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw 3 electrons on one side. Okay, and then 1 electron on the other side. Similarly, for the second carbon, I'll draw 3 electrons on one side and 1 electron on the other side. Then I'll make these two carbons share these electrons. Now after sharing, how many electrons does the first carbon have?
6.
6 or 7?
7.
7. What about the second carbon?
7.
Very good. So then what I'll do, I'll just bring in a hydrogen so that the 7th electron is also shared and carbon ends up getting 8. So I'll bring in a hydrogen as well. Okay, now this hydrogen has 2 electrons. This carbon has 8 electrons. This carbon has 8 electrons. This hydrogen has 2 electrons. So then I can draw the structure as C triple bond C, H and H. And this will be written as, sorry, this was C2H4. My bad. This is C2H2. All right, so this will be ethine.
Ma'am, how C2?
Sorry?
How C2?
Because there are 2 carbons, right? 1 carbon and 2 carbons. So C2. There are 2 hydrogens, so H2.
But they are sharing 6 electrons, carbon. So.
Yeah, okay. That 6 electrons they are sharing, and a pair of electrons is represented by a line, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So how many lines are there between a carbon and a carbon?
3.
3. So 3 times a pair is 6, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So this structure, this formula C2H2 does not tell you about the number of electrons. It will only tell you how many carbon atoms are there and how many hydrogen atoms are there.
Yes.
Similarly, the C2H4 tells you that there are 2 carbon atoms and 4 hydrogen atoms. Clear? We saw methane over here, right? Basically, I took only 1 carbon atom and then I attached hydrogens. Now, what if I take 2 carbon atoms? So, I'm just going to erase this, and instead of 1 carbon atom, I'll have 2 carbon atoms. Share between the 2 carbon atoms. Then I'll put in 6 hydrogens to share these other 3 electrons of the carbon.
C2H6.
Very good. Yes. So then this forms a bond. This forms a bond. Now this pair of electrons which are forming a bond, right? These pair of electrons which are forming a bond, whether it be this, it doesn't matter. All these pairs of electrons which are forming a bond, these are called bond pairs because they are forming a bond. Simple. Bond pairs. Okay. So this, I'm going to write this structure something like this, right? So this is C2H6. and this is nothing but ethane. Now if you notice that this C2 is common in all these three things. What else is common in all these three things? C2 is
H4.
common. H4 is H4 common? Does ethane have H4 or H2?
Ma'am, H2.
Right. So, okay, so H2 is common, C2 is common. What else is common? What about the names? This is ethane, this is ethene, this is ethyne. What is common?
Ma'am, eth.
Eth. Very good. So what do you think this eth means? It means 2 carbons. So eth means 2 carbons. Eth meaning 2 carbons. All right. So what do you think this ane, ene and ine mean?
The number of bond pairs.
The number of bond pairs. Yes, that is right. So if you look at the number of bonds between these 2 carbon atoms, it's just 1 bond. So whenever I have 1 bond, it is ane. Whenever I have 2 bonds, it is ene. Whenever I have 3 bonds, it is ine. Okay? So when I say ethine, I'm saying 2 carbons with a triple bond. So ethine, C2H2. So it means 2 carbons with a triple bond. Clear? So that is why when I say methane, CH4 is methane. So what is 1 carbon is nothing but I'm going to call it as meth. 2 carbons is eth. 3 carbons is prop. So meaning 1 carbon. Pro means 3 carbons. But 4 carbons. Pent 5 carbons. Hex 6 carbons. Hept 7 carbons. Okay, now I want you to draw the structure of, not even draw the structure. I just want you to tell me the chemical formula. For example, the chemical formula of ethane is C2H4. Sorry, C2H6. So chemical formula of ethane is C2H6. So I have 2 carbons and then 6 hydrogens like this. So the chemical formula is, this is the chemical formula. This is the chemical structure. So I want you to tell me the chemical formula of propane. Okay. All right. So now let's draw the structure, right? So I say prop. Prop meaning 3 carbons. Ane meaning all these carbons have single bonds. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to draw 3 carbons with single bonds. Now, if I draw 3 carbons with single bonds, then this carbon has 3 electrons left. This carbon has 2 electrons left. And this carbon has 3 electrons left. Right? So then I'm going to put 1 hydrogen here, 1 hydrogen here, 1 hydrogen here. So the answer is?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay.